My friends, good day. A plane crashed today at Nancy Airport and the toll is very heavy, 11 people. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we know today. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm going to say this on a personal note. I prefer to deal with accidents that date back to 1992 or 71 or 64, it doesn't matter. Old stories, even though in the end the analysis tools are the same as for a story that happened just a few hours ago. But on an emotional level, it's much simpler to deal with things from a distance, but sometimes life is what it is, and we deal with them up close. So I was saying today there was a serious accident that happened at Nancy SC Airport. So what is it about? We have an aircraft, a PC-6 type plane, so a Pilatus 6. It's a Swiss-made plane. This particular one dates from 1991. I don't know if it matters or not, but it was registered in Germany. If we look at the images, the few images that are circulating, we see a registration that starts with D, Delta, D-FIPS, whereas a plane registered in France would have its registration starting with F. Does it mean anything or not? We don't know at this point. By the way, everything I'm telling you in this video should be taken with a grain of salt or even several grains of salt. Because in the months and years to come, depending on the work done by the BEA, Transport Canada, and potentially the NTSB, since these investigations usually involve several authorities, well, we'll see what comes of it. So this plane, as I was saying, had taken off from Nancy SC Airport, runway 21. We're roughly heading southwest. And actually, if you look, it's because in that direction, and also behind us, there are buildings, there are houses. So the aircraft skimmed over houses as it fell, because it was actually taking off. It takes off, and it will literally crash just a few seconds later. It won't go very far. It will only make it a few hundred meters beyond the end of the runway. So there were 11 people on board. Who was it? There was a pilot who was described by the media as seasoned. We heard the word experienced. And then there were 10 people on board who were supposed to make parachute jumps. So we'll actually divide them into two groups. You have 5 instructors who will accompany 5 people who are jumping for the first time. So we have tandem jumps. So on board we have only one main parachute. And then we have a student who is attached by their harness to an instructor. Both jump at the same time, and it's the instructor who manages everything. So the students in question, or the clients in question who came for a first parachute jump, seemed to belong to the medical community of the region. I saw the name of the Clinique de Gentilly, or the Polyclinique de Gentilly, being mentioned. But anyway, we have 5 people belonging to the medical community. Nurses, male and female, doctors, it doesn't matter, we'll find out later, who had come to do a parachute jump. It was the second jump of the day. Previously, before this jump, the aircraft had taken off from the same runway, and then it gained altitude. It had dropped parachutists and then returned. So, maybe a few details I can give you. These planes, the PC-6, are powered by a turbine. It's a turbine that drives a 4-bladed propeller. The turbine is made by Pratt & Whitney Canada. That's why I told you earlier that the Canadians will probably send someone to take part in this investigation as the country that manufactures the engine. I think the engine will be a major topic in this story, even though we're not speculating yet. We don't know what happened. Actually, when you look at it, these planes that are used for dropping parachutists often have a lot of cycles. That means 2 cycles. Take off, full throttle, come back a few minutes later, shut down the engine, board people, restart, take off again, full throttle, and so on. For example, you might find 2 hours of flight time, but within those 2 hours you have 8 cycles. That means that engines, when you look at them, don't necessarily age just based on flight hours, but also according to the number of cycles. Of course, this isn't something unknown. It's not something that aviation is discovering today. No, it's well known, and to a large extent it's taken into account. But there you have it. The fact is that quite regularly, planes that are used for dropping parachutists tend to experience engine failures a bit more frequently. You know, even if I don't have any scientific statistics to back up what I'm saying, it seems pretty common. For example, let me tell you about the latest accident. It happened in Missouri, in Butler, about 15 days ago. And it killed 12 people. A turboprop plane, takeoff, engine failure, the plane crashes. All right, so there was also an accident on this channel. It was a twin engine plane, same thing, engine failure. It was a twin engine plane, but unfortunately the pilot couldn't control the asymmetric thrust. Once he lost an engine, he ended up in the trees, crashing almost vertically. Also, quite a few victims. So, here, of course, we still don't know what happened. For your information, there is no black box in these planes, there is no flight recorder, nor are they required to have one. Nevertheless, investigators often use surveillance cameras, sometimes ones that can be found on doorbells, in cars, in vehicles. Sometimes you can also find surveillance cameras at airports or people who are filming, even from inside the plane. In these situations, we often recover lots of GoPros and other devices, and that already gives us a first idea. Afterwards, the engine is removed and disassembled. Same with the structural members. We look at the impact and all that. And the story here still suggests, when we look at it, that obviously there might be something else that happened. But honestly, at this stage, with the pattern we know, if we apply it to what we've seen in the past, we're most likely dealing with an engine failure. Most likely, but I wouldn't bet on it, of course. Tomorrow they could say, no, the engine was working at 100%, but there was another problem. Well, of course, that's not an issue. But this kind of accident with this type of aircraft, quite often, it's an engine failure. And when you look, once this plane takes off from runway 21, what's in front of it? Well, in front of it, there are buildings, houses. But actually, even if it had taken off in the other direction, it would have been the same. Very often, these airports, when they were built, sometimes a long time ago, everything around them was empty. There were only vacant lots, which actually provided very good safety in case of an emergency. In case of engine failure during takeoff, because you just had to go straight, find a vacant lot, and then land, right? But today, civilization has reached right up to the airport fence, with roads, houses, shopping centers, all that. So now when pilots take off, they don't really have any options anymore. There's no option B. That means if he takes off and the engine fails, it's over. He won't even be able to turn back, for starters. Remember, we've talked several times on this channel about the impossible turn. That means if the plane has just taken off, it's maybe only a few dozen meters in the air, and the pilot wants to turn back, usually, it ends badly. There's not enough altitude, not enough speed, not enough energy to complete that turn. You have to go straight ahead. But in some cases, like what you see today, straight ahead there are houses. The people who were inside the plane couldn't jump either. Because you can't jump if you're just a few dozen meters from the ground, right? It's not like we've seen cases with planes. Once there was a case where a skydiving plane collided with another one in flight, but they were at high altitude. And what the people did was that everyone jumped. There were no deaths that day because everyone jumped out of the plane. But they were still professional skydivers, and it happened at a respectable altitude. But here, right above the ground, you're not going to jump out of a plane. When you look at the aircraft, it looks like it's wrecked pretty much in the same spot. That means it's not a plane whose wreckage was spread out over a long distance. You see, it's not an aircraft that hit and then was scattered over 100 meters. Here, everything seems to be in the same place. One thing that might be quite interesting is that on that day, it was hot, 32 degrees, it was really hot and all that. The aircraft goes down, there's no fire. So it's just like that. It's just an observation. I'm not suggesting anything at all. These are aircraft that run on jet A1, which is pretty similar to diesel. All right, so it's not like gasoline where the vapors just ignite like that. But still, I'm a little surprised there wasn't a fire. I'm just saying. Was there any fuel left in the tanks? We'll see. The NTSB will definitely check that. It was the second flight of the day. The aircraft had just completed its first cycle, and now it was doing its second cycle, maybe even its third. For your information, the owner of this plane had asked tracking platforms like Flight Radar 24 and others, or FlightAware, not to track this aircraft. He said, don't follow it. So in practice, that means if you search for it by its registration, you won't find it. That doesn't mean it can't be seen on ECAT. You see, it can still be seen. But instead of having the registration, you have an A. That's why the numbers or overlays I'm showing you still exist on flight radar, except they're harder to find because of the owner's request. By the way, that request created a bit of paranoia about this aircraft 2 or 3 years ago because it came to the United Kingdom, and then people saw it and they weren't very happy not knowing where it came from, where it was going, or what it was doing. And they thought maybe it was up to something sinister. Probably not, but you see what I mean. The public needs transparency. When transparency isn't there, people start asking, what's that? And you can see there are people who wrote to the British government under the transparency law, which forces administrations to provide the information they have about certain things. And then to ask what he was doing, what he was covering up in the sky, in the British sky, you see. And then the administration said, we have no idea. Okay, so the answer is online. I'll give it to you in the video description. That plane itself was involved in a minor accident in 2012, right? It belonged to another owner and it hit something while it was on the ground. Probably minor damage that still allowed it to keep flying. So there you go, my friends. What we know, or what we know today, is but if we want to stick, if we absolutely want to stick to the facts, you have a takeoff, then you have a plane that heads inexorably toward the ground. Well, it can't be icing. It was 32 degrees Celsius. You know what I mean? It's not overloading because the number of people it was carrying seemed consistent with its usual capacity. So that's not an issue. Anyway, there was a failure. There was an engine failure. There was an engine failure that happened, to be confirmed later. And then the pilot saw his aircraft heading toward the ground. There's not much you can do, experienced or not. There's really not much you can do. Still, it hit really hard, you know. That's what gets to me a little, because let's just say if he had said, well, I'm going to put it into best glide and go land on the road over there, even if it means hitting a parked car or getting caught in some electrical wires or something, the trajectory and possibly the outcome would have been different. Except here, you get the feeling that it's not an aircraft that made a failed emergency landing. That's not the case. That means I immediately rule out that possibility. It's not a situation where you have a plane attempting a landing that goes wrong, ending up with the plane flipping over or things like that. No, that's not the case. It's not that. Because that kind of landing doesn't result in such violence that out of 11 people, all 11 are dead. Here, we're more in a scenario of a stall and a fall from a certain height. All right, so literally you have an engine failure, a significant loss of power, and then, well, your plane, it's going to pitch up and then the speed will drop. And then, well, sooner or later it will go toward the ground, you know, in a way that it falls. As you can see, you saw it's pretty much wrecked in the same place, right? So there you go, my friends. We'll see later, you know, when other elements are available. And thank you again for supporting this channel. Thank you for all the messages that were sent to me, even from some pilots who are on this platform, who are at this airport. And I will keep you informed if anything else comes up. Thank you once again.